Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition, and we're back in studio broadcasting from Irvine, California. No, I'm not Freddy Krueger. I did have a little surgery on Friday, as I talked to you guys about yesterday. A little skin cancer removed from my nose, got a little healing period going on. So my best advice, if you suspect something, talk to your dermatologist and get it taken care of, particularly if you're a white guy like me. Hey, listen, Drew, welcome back to the show. Happy to have you here on a Tuesday. Welcome back.
It's good to be back with you. It's nice to see you in your studio, your home turf there.
My month-long journey between Kentucky, Florida, and some other places in between finally came to an end. I'm back in Southern California. And, it's really interesting, Drew. As you travel around the country, you really get a perspective in talking to people in different parts of the country. I mean, just different opinions, different ways people view the country. But I'm going to share one thing with you that's consistent across party lines, whether I'm talking to Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. There's a general feeling out in the country that we are not being led by a man who is really the president. I mean, there is a great deal of concern. And again, folks, this is an apolitical statement. I mean, because I've been all over the country spent some time in Illinois, spent some time in Kentucky, in Florida, Georgia, airports. You name it, people came up, I was talking to them. There's a general concern, Drew, that Joe Biden is not in charge of that White House. And we've seen over and over issues that the American people care about. He seems completely tone deaf. And I'm not sure whether Susan Rice is running the White House, Ron Klain. Drew, help me out on this. You travel in similar circles. What are you hearing out there and the people you're speaking to?
Well, all those names that you just mentioned are certainly part of the machine that's behind this administration. Look, it is an apolitical statement to say that Joe Biden is simply a figurehead president. There's nothing false about that statement. It's been that way since he came into the White House. Firstly, obviously, you have every time he speaks and get outs there, you have his handlers coming out, pulling him off stage. You have Joe Biden admitting, saying, hey, I'm going to get in trouble if I answer these questions. He's the president of the United States, the executive branch. Can you imagine Trump saying, hey, I can't answer this right now because, I'm going to get in trouble? The buck stopped with him. But look, I've written about this pretty extensively, whether it was in American Greatness and several articles since he came into office about this very issue. And I've talked about it on radio. And look, more than 75% of his staff came from the Obama administration.
Right.
So this is simply a carryover. Even the Surgeon General, you name it. Look at the list of people. They served in the Obama administration, and they're just back now under Joe Biden. Joe Biden didn't have a say in picking any of these people. And frankly, mentally, we know that he's not capable of doing that, fulfilling that task. He was just somebody that they ran because, he was Lunch Bucket Joe. He'd been around forever. He was an old white guy. And they wanted to push him out there as some kind of moderate. And, it's both a blessing and a curse for the Democratic Party, really, because Biden gets away with a lot, to be honest, because the American people, even though we know that he's not there, well, we also don't have an expectation otherwise, because he cannot give us what we want, which is a leader.
This administration, you mentioned the Obama administration, Drew, they make Obama look like a conservative to a moderate. They are so far to the left on so many issues, and it's going to come back to roost this fall when people go to vote. I was just looking at some numbers earlier today. The issues that Republicans are going to run on: energy, crime. Crime's out of control in this country. Immigration, completely out of control. And then the inflation figures. I heard the Biden press secretary speaking, and she's tried to blame Republicans for the immigration crisis that the Biden administration has created. Basically, it was a backhand slap saying, well, we need to bring Republicans to the table to negotiate some type of amnesty agreement. Drew, I'm sitting here saying, wait a second, 2 million people are crossing that border, including recently arrested people on the terrorist watch list. And what is the Biden administration doing? They're using these people as pawns for their political game. They don't care about people dying or coming across the river. They don't care about people dehydrating in the Arizona desert. They don't care about the billions of dollars the traffickers are making and the human sex trafficking and all the drugs and the fentanyl that's killing thousands of Americans. They're trying to flood the country with illegal immigrants to create a political issue, hoping that their base will support them on, quote, immigration reform. That is not going to happen. That is a pure fantasy of the left wing in this country. And here's what it comes down to: elections. Republicans are running on those key issues: bringing down inflation, fighting crime, controlling immigration if they ever get back the White House, okay? And then bringing in sound energy policies. Drew, 60% of Americans care about those issues. The Democrats are baking their entire fall campaign on one issue: abortion. And you and I have talked about this. American people, 37% thinks that's an important issue. 63 do not. So Drew, where would you rather be heading into the fall? Focusing on 60% of the issues Americans care about, or resting your whole campaign on abortion?
Yeah, I mean, this is simply where you get into politics, right? I mean, it is a game. We're trying to win an election here, and it doesn't mean that can't, come up and be debated again once we, come in and take back the House and the Senate. But it's frankly foolish. I mean, and look, the whole point is to deal with the issues that the American people most care about. So it's actually a betrayal of their constituency itself to be focusing on an issue that really doesn't have an impact, despite the media blowing it up, on the American citizen. You have a choice whether you can engage in sexual behavior that leads to pregnancy. And, but you don't have a choice about what the Democratic Party is doing in terms of spending money, pushing this Green New Deal, causing inflation to go up. I mean, the dollar today is worth 88 cents compared to what it was when Joe Biden came into office. These are the issues that are affecting the American people, and that should be bipartisan. That should be apolitical. But, I think the Democratic Party, they don't have anywhere to hide anymore. They have gone so far that they have exposed themselves. All of the lies that they've told their base, the Democrats in this country, who are very good and moral, decent people who have just been bamboozled for so long since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Well, the Democratic Party is not the party of morality. They are not the party of geniuses. They are not the party of any of these things. They are the party that they were in the era of slavery in this country. That party never changed. They just engaged in the most successful PR campaign in American history in terms of politics, right? And so this is where we are, and they can't run from it anymore. So look, with the border, like you mentioned out, I've heard, some of these Democrats say, oh, well, Trump kinked it up. It's as if it was a steady hose of immigration just coming every day. And, he turned it off, and they all just stood at the border, waiting for what? For Biden to open the floodgates? Even that incriminates them. So, look, they don't have any logical arguments.
No. And when you talk about the border, the esteemed Vice President Harris, who's, quote, supposedly in charge of the border, she is an absolute, unmitigated disaster, and the American public and even the Democratic Party recognizes what a disaster she is. Biden hasn't taken one trip down there since he's been inaugurated president. It is a complete disaster down there. And now, when the Biden administration was flying illegal immigrants to different northern cities by planes at night, DeSantis and Abbott have said, the heck with this. We're going to do it in the light of day, where Abbott's constantly shipping illegal immigrants to various northern cities. DeSantis is flying them around too. And for these radical liberals to say, well, these Republican governors are, creating human rights violations, that is nuts. I mean, DeSantis is doing the right thing, Greg Abbott's doing the right thing, and you know what? The citizens of Texas who are going to vote on Greg Abbott this coming fall, he's leading by 11 points right now over that knucklehead Beto Bozo O'Rourke, Robert Francis O'Rourke. Ron DeSantis is up 5 or 6 points on Charlie Crist in Florida. We'll see when the voters go to the polls if they believe DeSantis and Abbott are doing the right thing or if these radical liberal Democrats are doing. And I got a feeling Abbott and DeSantis are going to come out on the right side of history on this. It's just another example, Drew, of the complete fraud that is the Democratic Party. And you know what? I think that fraud is rising to the level where their voters are saying, hey, wait a minute now. They're telling me inflation's over. Biden had the gall to go out there and say, well, we beat it, inflation's flat. No, it's not. Year over year, it's still up 8%. And their voters, Drew, are starting to feel it, and they're saying, wait a minute, something's wrong here.
Yeah, and this is why you're seeing the rhetoric from the Democratic Party ratchet up against MAGA, Republicans, Trump, DeSantis, all these people. This is why they're likening them to, domestic terrorists and everything else, because look how bad the Democratic Party looks to their own voter base.
Exactly.
These people are looking for an escape plan. They're looking for another party to support. So what the Democratic Party is doing, they can't hide who they are anymore. Right. And so what they're trying to do is convince their voter base and Americans to stick with them because the Republicans are even worse. That's really what the strategy boils down to. They're creating a foil by which they can look better than the other option.
Yeah. And creating a foil when your policies are bad and basing your whole campaign on a single issue, abortion, that frankly, even people in their own party say that's not the primary issue that they're going to vote on. That's a flawed strategy. Sure, are you going to get the rabid, radical, liberal Democratic base to support you? You had those votes anyhow. You don't have to campaign on abortion to get the radical left to vote for you. You already have those votes. I think, Drew, when it comes down, look, Federal Reserve is going to meet tomorrow and they're going to raise interest rates another 75 basis points. People all across the country who bought houses this year, in the frenzy, and I've seen a lot of left-wing commentators say, hey, we really screwed this one up, they're going to be hurting. Prices of homes across the country have started falling. They're going to fall further. Drew, going out today, let me give you some numbers. And this affects people's pocketbooks. 30-year fixed-rate mortgages today, 6.42%. That is double where it was 6 months ago. Double. Folks, economically, you cannot double interest rates and expect home values to even stay the same where they are right now. Demand's going to slump. People can't keep up with their incomes. Look, 1 out of 5 Americans is borrowing money to pay for food right now. And a lot of these, Drew, these are Democratic voters. I mean, we jokingly kid them as, well, they're low information, or else they're really highly educated and they look down upon the lower information people. But the truth is, and again, I don't have any scientific proof of this, but I'll bet Biden's policies are hurting his own voters more than they're hurting Republicans. What say you?
That's absolutely correct. That they're certainly hurting their base. I mean, I just because I've been on a kick, I'm working on this book and exposing the Democratic Party. And, I'm going through the history of Lyndon B. Johnson. I just want to use an example here. This is a guy who was an avowed racist. He spent his entire life opposing, civil rights. And then, in 1964, he signs the Civil Rights Legislation Act of 1964 into law. But it was a majority of Democrats who opposed the legislation. He just happened to sign it into law. And he said the reason he was doing it was he had to give, we'll just say he called them Negroes, a little something, but not enough to make a difference. We just got to quiet him down because he feared what was going to happen to what happened to the Democrats after the Civil War, right? Reconstruction. Blacks were supporting the Republican Party, and he wanted to ensure that blacks supported him in perpetuity. So he passed all his poverty measures and everything else, which hurt the very people he claimed to be helping. Mm-hmm. But, he claimed, of course, that he was the de facto, supporter of civil rights and blacks in this country. But they've been bamboozled ever since. And that's just expanded to the rest of the Democratic voter base. I mean, they vote for these politicians and their policies are absolutely devastating to them. I mean, look, he's forgiving student loan debt. He's X, Y, Z. All these people are affected by things that the Democrats have championed for the last, number of decades. Right. And I just hope that Democrats will wake up and finally be pragmatic. I mean, look at these politicians like you would view anybody in the private sector. The American politician, especially in the Democratic Party, is the only person in the world that is judged by their stated intentions rather than their results. That's bizarre. It
is a bizarre, and that's a commentary on where the Democratic Party is right now. Drew, I find it interesting. Polling came out that 63% of Americans feel they're falling behind the 8 ball on not being able to keep up with inflation. 63%. It tells me just how out of touch the Biden administration is. And a great chunk of those voters are their voters. Why are they going to support a Democrat? If you're sitting there and you're saying, well, how do they help me? Well, they passed the Inflation Enhancement Act. I know it's the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you think that's going to help anybody's pocketbook that's a Democratic voter? No, it's not going to help anyone. It'll help some climate activists and maybe some university types and maybe political donors for these green energy jobs that donated. It's not helping the average American. And inflation's not going down one iota because of that bill. The bill they just passed on helping out semiconductor companies. Maybe down the road it may help out the United States a little bit, but is that going to help out Democratic voters? I say probably not. So when I look at these bills passing, and then I go back and I say, well, what was the killer bill that they passed? Well, they passed a $1.9 trillion spending bill the first month out of the gate when he was president, and it turned out to be a disaster. Add that to the Federal Reserve's easy money policies, and you are sitting here right now with all the problems this country has. Listen, I got a feeling that it's going to come back to bite him. Drew, I just don't believe big picture that you can fool the American people. You may fool them in one election, and I think that happened last time. Trump contributed some to that. We're not going to rehash the 2020 election. We don't do that. We look forward here on this show. But you're not going to fool them again. And when you come out and say Republicans are bad, he gave that disastrous speech. He's been ridiculed for it. He's so out of touch, Drew, even his own base. Okay, he comes out and basically claims to Scott Pelley I should call Scott Pelley the representative of the Democratic National Committee, as softball questions as he gave on that interview the other day. But he comes out and he basically says the pandemic's over. Well, most people are living their lives like the pandemic's over. Unfortunately, statistics have a little way of getting in the way of facts that the Democratic Party doesn't want you to hear. And to Democrats, that was kryptonite. It undercut every argument that they have for restrictions on school, mask mandates, all the crap they've been imposing on the American people. Biden just undercut it in one fell swoop.
Yeah, well, that goes all the way back to how you started the show, talking about how you talk to people as you travel throughout the country who don't believe this man is in charge of anything. And here's the latest example of that. He goes on 60 Minutes. And I saw a joke, by the way, just for a little levity. What's his name? Tim Allen, right? Comedian Tim Allen. He said that he heard that Joe Biden had got on 60 Minutes and asked how long the show was going to run.
That's great.
So anyway, but you know, look, he goes on there, and I mean, that's a pretty big snafu, right? I mean, to be out of touch with, you know, the rest of your party and everything else, to go and say the pandemic is over. And you're exactly right. The Democrats are just losing their minds over this because it does undermine everything. It even undermines, for example, his latest justification for this, you know, Student Debt Forgiveness Act, right? Because he was using that, I think it was from 2003, the HEROES Act, which basically said you could do certain things like that in terms of alleviation if you had, you know, national emergency like a war and so on and so forth. Well, here he is saying, hey, the pandemic's over. And so there is no national emergency, but he's using national emergency to try and to get away with it. You know, it's unconstitutional, but that aside, this is another argument. But look, I don't believe Newsom. He hasn't given up his emergency powers yet. There are many governors throughout the country who still have those powers in place. And they're using the pandemic. You know, look, this war on the pandemic is like the war on poverty. Right. You know, it's just you're substituting some word in there, but it's really not about either of those things. I mean, this has always been about justifying and forcing through spending the Democrats' agenda and pushing and empowering them. That's what it's been about. So this is devastating to them. So here he is. The pandemic's over, but they never want it to end.
No, it's the endless pandemic for them. That's how they were going to try to lie to their voters and keep themselves in power. And it's just, again, some of this stuff is comical. I could laugh at it, but it's really serious stuff. The student loan debacle, the only thing I'm surprised of on that, Drew, and I don't know why it hasn't happened yet, is there hasn't been litigation put forth to halt it. I don't know why. I mean, I'm not a litigator, but I mean, I got to believe that at a certain point there will be litigation filed. It's patently illegal. Pelosi even said the president doesn't have the power to do this. So I'm not sure why, but hopefully before the election there'll be a lawsuit brought to halt that. It's blatantly illegal, and I think it's a political effort to buy votes for people who traditionally do not vote in midterm elections at numbers that their seniors vote. So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. I do want to get to some polling numbers, though. And, folks, you hear numbers all across the board. But let Drew and I really give you some analysis about what's really happening here, because these poll numbers are shifting. Mitch McConnell has sort of shifted his tone a little bit. He thought, well, we may not take the Senate. And to where now I think we have a fighting chance to take the Senate. I got news for you. Rick Scott, the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee chairman, I know Rick pretty well. The guy's extremely wealthy, made his money in the medical business. When he ran for Senate, people said there's no way he's going to win. Well, he won. Albeit an unbelievably close election for governor, he won. Then he ran for another term, won again. They said he couldn't defeat Bill Nelson for Senate. He said, we're going to win. We're going to win this race. He won it by 0.25%, Drew, 0.25%. Well, he came out with a funding plan and a strategic plan for the Republicans. McConnell was sort of lukewarm to it, and that's treating it nicely. Now, all of a sudden, Rick Scott looks like a genius because in certain races, Republicans have tightened to within the margin of error, albeit Arizona, where Blake Masters is now down 1 point to Mark Kelly. Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, Mandela Barnes, this great, great liberal Democrat who's to the left of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Polling showed him ahead. Not anymore. Ron Johnson up by 4. Real Clear Politics has him up by a point. And here's another interesting one. I'm going to go back to this Arizona one here, Drew, and I want your thoughts on this. How can Blake Masters be down 1 point running against Mark Kelly, who's not that popular in Arizona despite his background as an astronaut? And Carrie Lake, the Republican nominee for governor who embraced Trump, she's up 4. I have a hard time envisioning, Drew, that Carrie Lake would win the governorship by 4+ points and her coattails wouldn't be enough to carry Blake Masters to defeat Kelly. What are your thoughts on that, Arizona and the tightening of these other races?
Well, the Arizona one is interesting because you're right. Those are both statewide races, right? Yeah. So you've got a Senate seat, which everyone's voting on in the state, and you've got a governorship, which everyone's voting on in the state. So, those people are in the same position in terms of being Trump endorsed and everything else. So it actually makes no sense whatsoever that one would poll ahead and one would poll behind. I don't think, the governor, look, and the thing is, it really is a situation in the midterms where people are voting Democrat versus Republican, period. People are not making their voting decisions in this particular election based on who the candidate is. The candidate who got through the primaries, if they're Republican, Republicans are going to vote for them. Okay, if the Democrat that got through, whatever Democrats remain are going to vote for them. So I think that's false. Again, we keep talking about these polls and things, and it's always difficult, right? Because some say one thing, and you want to believe the ones that go your way.
Of course.
But I do believe that Carrie Lake is ahead so substantially, and I think it follows that Blake Masters is as well. I see them both winning in Arizona.
I would agree with you.
Especially with illegal immigration.
I would agree with you, and illegal immigration is going to be a big piece. And I'm going to share this with you, too. You just made 2 interesting points. On the Republican side, Republican enthusiasm is 5 points higher than Democrats. And what that means, folks, you're going to get 90% of Republicans voting for Republicans. Add another 5 to that, then now you're up to about 95% of Republican voters will vote for the Republican. Democrats right now, it's sitting at about 84%. That's a 6-point difference. You might think, Mark, that's not that big a deal. It is a big deal, and I'll tell you why. If 95% of Republicans vote for the Republican and 85% of the Democrats vote for the Democrat, that's 15% of Democratic voters that are saying, we don't like the direction our party's going. We don't like Joe Biden's leadership. We don't like the fact we're falling behind on inflation. We're sick and tired of crime. We're sick and tired of liberal prosecutors. And we're sick and tired of an open border. Then you take the independent voters, which will decide most of these elections, they are trending towards the Republican side. So, Drew, we don't know if it's going to become a red trickle or a red wave, but if trends continue and these unpopular policies continue to be in effect, and I don't see anything going to change in between now and Election Day. I think that the policies are baked in. I think it's going to be a problem for them. I look at that race in Texas. Okay, Beto O'Rourke was down 5 or 6 points. That's about what I expected. When I saw a poll out today saying Greg Abbott's up by 11, what's the one issue that's really driving Texas? Illegal immigration. Illegal immigration, it flooded into Texas. And I find it ironic. People in New York City, Washington, D.C., Martha's Vineyard, 50 illegal immigrants come into Martha's Vineyard, and it's like national chaos has erupted. A couple busloads go into Chicago, New York, and D.C. They want to call out the National Guard. When millions have gone into Texas, and they're like, that's a Texas problem. No, it's a United States problem, because the president and the vice president have deliberately not gone down and they're not enforcing our laws on the border, and they're letting people just flood across. So I think that's a big deal when I see numbers like that. I also think when I look at these tight races, I think Herschel Walker has a really good shot in Georgia. I think Ron Johnson's going to win in Wisconsin. I think the Republicans are going to carry North Carolina. I think at the end of the day, if the election, and it's not held today, but if it were, Drew, we either end up with a 50-50 Senate or a 51-49 Republican. That's how I'm handicapping it right now, and I still think we're going to take 20 seats in the House.
Well, look, we can look at this another way too, just kind of logically, even without getting into all the statistics and everything else. Look what's happened since Joe Biden came into office. You've had Democrats leaving the Democrat Party. Yeah. You have not had Republicans leave the Republican Party. So you've had people defect from the Democrats, not the Republicans. It hasn't gone the other way, okay? Right. And so when you also consider that those people who aren't going to vote Republican will just not vote at all, I mean, obviously everything's going in favor of the Republican Party right now. I mean, that's how I see it. There has not been a surge of support or anyone abandoning the Republican Party. That's not the case.
What do you make of the fact that every time, and again, I've been on the road, I saw a lot of different things, had a little bit of downtime. When I had some downtime, I'd flip back across the various liberal conservative channels. Drew, it seems to me like whenever I'm flipping to a liberal channel, there's only one story, and that story's Trump. I just got to believe most people, I hear this all the time, well, Trump's going to drag down the Republican Party. Those Democrats that are watching these liberal shows, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, and read the New York Times, Washington Post, they're not voting for Republicans. They're already going to vote for Democrats. So when I see these media outlets, all they're doing is Trump bad, Trump this, Trump that. And I think they're trying to convince people that all Republicans are like Trump. I'm not buying it. I think people are looking ahead, and I think, I'm going to use your analogy, people are going to vote. Look, candidates do matter. I take a little exception to that. But generally speaking, they're going to look at the Democratic Party and say, wait a minute, Biden's the president. They control the Senate. They control the House. How is my life better or worse than it was 2 years ago? The old Ronald Reagan scenario. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? It holds true. And my gut feeling, Drew, tells me people are going to, when they go to vote, particularly the independents, are going to say, you know what? It wasn't that bad under Trump. Yeah, I thought the guy was an ogre. I didn't like his Twitter account. Some people may say he's an asshole. I don't like him. But his policies, there's no question the United States was in a better position as a country when Trump was president than where we are right now. Now, some liberal Democrats will take exception to that. But I would say most Republicans, 90+%, and a good chunk of independents objectively would say, I didn't like Trump, but it wasn't that bad under him, and we don't have these problems we have now.
Yeah, I was just thinking there's something else to this, too, that adds to kind of the lack of reliability of some of these polls. We live in a country right now in which the Democratic Party and the president himself have so demonized anybody who's a Republican or even a Trump supporter that there are many people in this country who are Democrats and independents who may have even supported Joe Biden in 2020 who are certainly going to support Republicans right now.
Right.
But they are not going to admit vocally to anyone that they're going to do it. They'll go into the voting booth and they'll cast their vote for Republican, and they may even lie about it later, you know. But you know, that's the environment they've cultivated, and the Democrats have done that to themselves. So you know, people are afraid of being honest about that. But there are many people I've talked to who I know are going to behave that way.
Yeah. Let me. We got to close out in a couple of minutes, but I want to ask your opinion. What do you make of what's going on right now? Ukraine sinks a ship, a Russian supply ship. The Russians are talking about annexing territory that they're losing. You know, and then Joe Biden steps up and he says, "Well, that we're going to defend Taiwan at any cost." Drew, do you think the American people is behind President Biden when he says we'll defend Taiwan at any cost, and you know we're going to continue unequivocal, massive aid into Ukraine from both the United States and NATO? I mean, I think people feel good about Ukraine, but you know, when you talk to them about sending American troops into Taiwan, which Biden basically affirmed yesterday, I'm not sure the American people's with the president on some of these foreign policy initiatives.
No. I mean, that's a whole nother topic that could come up at any moment, and that would have devastating repercussions across the globe. Right. And frankly, I don't know what China's waiting for. There's nothing to deter them from taking Taiwan. And our policy towards Taiwan and China has been absolutely idiotic for decades and decades. You know, on the one hand, you know, we say that we officially recognize, you know that Taiwan essentially belongs to China, but unofficially, you know, we support, you know, right, Taiwan. So it's absurd. And look, I mean, China's seizure of Taiwan is significant. You know, it should be stopped. But I think on one hand, I mean, nobody believes that Joe Biden would even send troops or do anything to deter it. And so that's adding to this problem. And you're right. I mean, we're not really in a position, less and less so financially or anything else with military capacity to really do much anymore. You know, I mean, our military is weakening by the day. And not only do we not carry a big stick anymore, but we're not prepared. And so I do fear that. And I think it's coming one day. There are many people you know, in some of the circles of individuals I talk to, some of them are you know, high level military, retired, and so on and so forth. And they believe it's imminent.
Yeah, we've had some people come on this show and talk about that. I got 30 seconds left. Give our audience a little sneak preview. You're writing a book right now, and share with our audience, what's the subject of the book? You know, tell us the time frame, because I know a lot of people will be interested in it, Drew.
Yeah. So it's my second book. The first one was called Uncommon Sense, you know, play off of Thomas Paine. But this one is tentatively titled Why I'm Not a Democrat. Because what I want people to understand is, you know, even though I'm conservative and I grew up in Texas, I have been around liberal Democrats my whole life, right? I went to an elitist all-male college prep school in Dallas. It was Jesuit, okay? That was not a bastion of conservatism, nor was my time spent working in fashion for Marc Jacobs. I lived in Milan, Italy for 2.5 years working, socialist country. I speak Italian. And then, you know, I worked in Hollywood for many years as well. That was also not a bastion of conservatism. So I've been around it my entire life. And so I've actually analyzed and I look at things pragmatically, and I want people to understand. I want people to understand the history of the Democratic Party, the big switch, right? Oh, all of a sudden, after an entire history of supporting slavery and segregation, the Democrats suddenly became the de facto proponents of the civil rights movement, and Republicans automatically were reduced to, you know, being a racist, you know, pro-segregation party. I mean, despite dying for the issue in the past. So I want to address these issues. I want to address climate change. I want to address all of these things that so many people have been told by the Democratic Party. And I want to explain why they make me not a Democrat. You know, whether it's economic policy, whether it's welfare. I want to explain to people why it doesn't work.
So, Drew, when are you going to finish the book? Give us our viewers a little bit of a time frame here.
Well, I mean, I would like to. I mean, setting goals is very important. I'd like to finish by the end of the year. You know, okay. I mean, to be honest, right now, it's my writing schedule is, you know, between the hours of 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. That's what I've got. Okay. And so we'll see. You know, I'm anxious to get it finished, to be honest, because I want Democrats to be willing to read this as well. And that's my challenge to them. I say, hey, I put up with your crap and listen to your garbage my whole life. If you're so confident, read this book.
Well, Drew, I'll tell you this, as someone who literally respects your point of view, I'm looking forward to seeing what the writings say, because you have some terrific views, you have a lot of experience, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you put pen to paper on. That will be exciting. So congratulations on your work, and I look forward to seeing it. So much the best.
I appreciate it, Mark. Thank you so much.
Okay, look, I got to wrap it up there, folks. I know I look like Kruger a little bit, but gradually it's going to get better every day. Drew, thank you for joining me today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Let's keep an eye on these races, folks, because I think there's going to be good news coming this fall. And if we're wrong, cut our heads off. But I think we're going to have some good news coming up. Drew, thanks again for joining me today. Stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, that's it.